As we approach Lent, Pastor Peter is planning to focus on spiritual practices and on our spiritual journey. One of the most important spiritual practices is the practice of using Jesus as our example. Today's text is a bit of a challenge for those of us who see Jesus as our example. It comes from the first chapter of the earliest gospel, the gospel created by the community known as Mark, and it highlights some of the extraordinary experiences of Jesus that most of us would find difficult to emulate. The first chapter of the Gospel of Mark is action-packed. Jesus first experiences an exceptional baptism, followed by 40 days in the desert, both things that are beyond most of our experiences. Then Jesus calls his first 4 disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, and travels to a local synagogue. How many of you have met someone who is so spiritually compelling that you dropped everything to follow them? Even though our church vision states that we use Jesus as our example, we discover some big challenges to that effort right away in the first chapter in the Gospel of Mark. Today's section of text comes from the first chapter of Mark, and it begins with Jesus at the synagogue. Spiritual community was vital to Jesus. And with him as our example, we also gather every Sunday as a church community. Coming to church is an example set that Jesus set that is relatively easy to follow. And all you did that today. Good job. It's a vital start. Then in today's text, Jesus leaves the synagogue and enters the home of Peter, where his mother-in-law is sick with a fever. Jesus, as our example, does what? He touches her and the fever is immediately gone. Even today's best doctors can't do that. I found that sometimes when I touch a person with a fever, the opposite happens. The fever doesn't leave them, it latches on to me. Another example of my falling short, or maybe being a bit misguided in my attempt to follow the example of Jesus. Then Jesus enters the city and heals a lot more people there. After which, finally, Jesus sleeps. Now, there's an example I can follow. I can sleep. So the first chapter of Mark reminds us that Jesus participated in religious rituals such as baptism, fasting, and attending synagogue, and got significant value from them, just as we strive to do. The Gospels also show us that at least once Jesus needed a long period of time alone with God, 40 days. While few of us could survive 40 days in the wilderness, almost all of us would benefit significantly from an extended time dedicated to a better connection with God. Just as Jesus exemplified in this first chapter of John. Those are the things that Jesus did. And while we can't heal people as dramatically as Jesus did, we can seek out those who are suffering and help as much as we are able. To see Jesus in the least of these. With Jesus as our example, we can learn to be as healing as we possibly can be in every circumstance that we come in contact with. Even though there are challenges to our use of Jesus as our example in this chapter of Mark, we still find some helpful spiritual practices when we look to Jesus as an example for us to follow in practical ways. The next action noted in the text was that Jesus got a good night's sleep, and then things really started to get interesting. Before sunrise, Jesus goes off to pray alone. This is after Jesus had a full night's sleep and before he starts his day. Jesus finds a deserted, peaceful place where he could not easily be disturbed. Jesus needed to spend time, peaceful, quiet time with God every day. The Bible uses the word pray, which means talk to God. Listening to God is assumed whenever the Bible uses the word pray. For today, though, I'm going to use the term meditation when referring to listening to God, and the word pray for talking to God. I want to do this because in modern times, we tend to put more focus and emphasis on praying, on talking to God, than we do on listening to God. It's easier to talk to God than it is to listen to God. In fact, every thought we have in a lot of ways is a prayer. And most of us, however, lack the ability to silence our thoughts. And this ability to silence our thoughts is an incredibly helpful ability if we're to accurately hear God's still, small voice. When Jesus spent time in prayer, we assume that Jesus could silence his own thoughts and clearly hear the words of God in that moment and clearly be those words. Jesus intentionally set aside time for this in today's text. If all you want to do is talk to God, you can do that anywhere. Listening is more difficult. Even Jesus needed peace and quiet to do that. We know from the rest of the gospel that sometimes that peaceful time for Jesus was early in the morning, sometimes it was during the day, sometimes it was at night. One of the very early examples Jesus provides us with this daily spiritual practice involving prayer and meditation occurs here in the Gospel of Mark. A practice that Jesus quite likely maintained for much of his life. It's mentioned all over the place. This time of peaceful reflection in today's story is eventually interrupted by Peter, who informs Jesus that everyone is looking for him. Notice in this story the back and forth of Jesus taking action, of Jesus teaching and healing, and Jesus seeking seclusion. We typically don't talk much about the spiritual need to spend time alone, even when we read this text. We just gloss over it frequently. We tend to focus on the actions, which is natural, the healing, the teaching. If Jesus is our example, we also need to pay attention to more than just the amazing healings and the pithy teachings. It's human nature to focus on the extraordinary stuff, and we tend to think that that's actually what's important. I'm not completely comfortable with that. And the reason is because we can't expect to do the extraordinary spiritual things if we don't take time to do the basics. Spending time focused on God, both as a community and in solitude, takes some level of effort. We find both practices in the life of Jesus, and we also find these two practices in all of the world's major religions. This is not unique to Christianity. Setting aside time with God is both corporately as a community and individually in seclusion are two of the vital things that Jesus did frequently that we can easily do as well. And it's possible that our failure to follow through on these two things conspire to diminish our abilities to teach, to learn, and to heal. Did Jesus pray and meditate every day? It sure looks like he did. In addition to church, do you seek a deserted place on a regular basis? Do you sit silently in meditation every day, listening for God's still small voice? If you do engage in meditation and prayer, how do you know you're doing it correctly? How do you know you're doing it right? How do you know you're doing it the way Jesus did it? It's an important question to ask. Jesus was asked for advice on how to pray, and so we honor the Lord's Prayer every Sunday. But you don't have to leave it there. It doesn't have to be limited to Sunday. Sitting silently, occasionally repeating the Lord's Prayer is one type of Christian meditation and prayer. It's very powerful. We know that Jesus did not limit his prayers to this one prayer, and that Jesus quite likely taught his disciples many other prayers and meditation techniques, many ways to talk to God and to listen. But bottom line, Jesus found it necessary himself personally to spend time quietly. And maybe one of the most basic and important elements of a spiritual life. It's also important if you're going to actually use Jesus as your example as well. Our interest here is to meditate like Jesus did, not just any old way. But that's a little difficult because we don't have that much detail in Scripture. We've got a lot. But the Bible doesn't say how long Jesus spent with God each day. However, how long he spent alone with God each day. The Bible does not say how long he did a lot of things, or exactly what process he followed. Modern research, however, has shown that actually a few minutes makes a big difference. It doesn't have to be that much time, according to recent research. We will want to use this time with God well. We don't want to waste it. Particularly, many of us only have a few minutes. Saying the Lord's Prayer each day, or the prayer Jesus said in the garden, one of my favorites, not my will, but your will be done, are excellent examples provided by Jesus, examples we can follow. But there are many other examples available to choose from. The New Age movement and the self-help craze have provided a number of good and bad examples and techniques for meditation. One bad example, some self-help fads and even some Christian theology suggest that simply imagining or focusing on a particular positive future or outcome will result in you actually getting that future outcome. Have you heard that before? Kind of a pray it or wish it and it'll come true approach. I don't think that's what Jesus was doing. Interestingly, research has shown that it can actually be harmful to sit around imagining the best possible you. And I mention research because that is one of the positive things that came out of the New Age and self-help movement. Several universities took notice and began serious research on the effects of self-help programs and specifically on meditation. They studied it carefully. Recent meditation research also utilizes a lot of the new technology, such as brain scans, MRIs, that allow us to test if meditation is beneficial or harmful. Is it repeatable? And can we observe and measure the effects on our brain functioning? The findings are fascinating and provide insight into what works and doesn't work. Proper meditation literally rebuilds gray matter in as little as 8 weeks. It changes our brain. The research is incredible. It turns out that practicing meditation every day does far more than just provide a short-term peaceful and physical relaxation. Simple meditation, even if just practiced for a short amount of time, actually provides cognitive and psychological benefits that persist all day long, rapidly leading to new brain structure and capacity and capability. The sections of the brain shown to grow due to meditation are those areas that are important, that are vital for learning, memory, self-awareness, compassion, and introspection. The scientific results are amazing. Jesus was on to something. Jesus knew what he was doing. Jesus as our example, showing us. The part of your brain needed to handle stress actually shrinks since it's not needed as much. The part of your brain that senses your surrounding grows. The data is stunning. And the number of these the data is so stunning that a number of these meditation techniques are now being taught by corporations, schools. The Marines are using them. Meditation might be the next great health fad in this country. And what's even more significant is that it works best within a faith community. The rest of the world is discovering what a few of us have been doing for a lot of years, and now there's real evidence that it works, and works really well. Pretty much all of our traditional Christian techniques have been shown to be highly effective. And meditation is easier than you might think. You don't have to sit in a particular way, just be comfortable. Meditation is an exercise in building spirituality and brain capacity that's generally self-directed. Have you found it difficult to get started? With Jesus as our example, notice that he set aside a place and time for meditation, a secluded place. So to get started, I recommend that you set up such a place in your own home, possibly in your office as well. It can be as elaborate or as simple as you like. So elaborate that it involves paintings, books, stained glass, a small altar, a place to sit. Or it could be as simple as a pad on the floor that no one knows is there but you. For me, it's a particular chair. A bed is usually not the best because we so strongly associate bed with sleep, not meditation. We need a place that we can associate with meditation, a place that reminds us of God, a place where you can go and sit peacefully, just as Jesus Christ did. So what do you do in that place? And how long will you spend there? Well, it will change over time. You start by just deciding on the place, and if helpful, put a few symbols nearby, such as a cross or a Bible. I find it helpful also to consecrate the space by saying a prayer, such as, Lord, may this spot be a connecting point between us, a place where I set aside to listen to you through Jesus Christ. You don't have to say it every day, but it's to remind us to center ourselves. And once the place is set up, you only have to pick a quiet time to go and sit there alone. No need to rush. First, just see where you're at. How long can you sit still? Can you just sit and listen to yourself breathe? When I do that, I just remind myself that it's God that is breathing me, and I just observe God breathing me, God breathing through me. I don't control it. I just watch it. You don't have to have an empty mind. In fact, the ability to empty your mind is an advanced capability, an advanced ability that you will only develop after years of practice. Although for some people, a few weeks of practice is enough. Depends on where you're at. It's okay just to sit and watch your thoughts and emotions without judging them. That's also a good place to start. Just let the thoughts come and go in peace. What can you learn from them? If you've not sat quietly with God before, don't expect that it will go well right away. It won't. Sometimes it does, but usually not. That's okay. Try. If it doesn't work well, fine. Get up. Now that you've set your place, just remember to come back and try again tomorrow. Persistence. Persistence is what works. Just 5 minutes each day until you feel you need more time. As we approach Ash Wednesday and Lent, this is traditionally a time that we reevaluate our spiritual path and ask ourselves how we can better follow the example set by Jesus Christ. Come to church every Sunday to learn new ways to meditate, pray, and sing to God. These are all things you can do in your place of solitude. Also, come on Wednesday evenings for our midweek reminder and for even more ideas and techniques you can try at home. Over Lent, set aside a place, somewhere, you can spend a few minutes each day with God. It doesn't take much. As it says in Psalm 46, just be still and know that I am God.